Off the record. The concept of losing your humanity is something that is pretty startling and viscerally wrenching to an individual. As a species, we pride ourselves on unique talents, abilities, and codes. To have any of that taken away and be replaced by something else is disturbing to us. This is why diseases that affect the brain are looked upon fearfully, like the progression of dementia, for instance. As the degradation of the brain continues over time, this ultimately leads to a shell of the former person with no memories, difficulty communicating, and a dependency on others, which, depending on who the person was originally, might be the polar opposite of what they used to be. This is exactly what makes SCP-1242 such a horrible process to experience. The person will be robbed of what they were, what they thought, but still retain fragmented memories. They will become someone else should they survive the excruciating process.
Item Number: SCP-1242. Object Class: Euclid. Special Containment Procedures. SCP-1242 is to be contained in 2 adjoining rooms measuring 2 meters by 2 meters by 3 meters, capable of sustaining quarantine for a Category A UN 2814 biohazard. The rooms should be separated by an airlock. All access to the subject is to be limited to a single entry point equipped with a remote handling, clean room, decontamination, and quarantine facilities. Remote handling is to be used when interacting with SCP-1242 whenever possible. Level A biohazard suits are required for non-test subjects physically interacting with SCP-1242. Nutritional needs are human normal and should be met using standard quarantine protocols. Waste material should be treated as a Category A UN 2814 biohazard. Waste may be disposed of only after heat sterilization and storage for a period of no less than 14 days to ensure success of the sterilization procedures. Subject is on a strict suicide watch and is not allowed any object or material that would facilitate self-harm. Due to the object's proven capability for self-harm, all requests made by subject must be submitted to the site director.
SCP-1242 does not present visually different from any normal teenager. You would not suspect that they are infected with a disease that causes the changes in others, but what's an interesting thought is this person the original, or is there a progenitor out there that created this version? The depression that 1242 exhibits would seem to indicate that either they are sad at what they have done despite it being really no fault of their own, or that they have been changed into this being as well. But to understand what is happening to them and why, we must first examine the logs concerning who they are and what has afflicted them.
Description: SCP-1242 is an adolescent Caucasian human male, 137 centimeters in height, weighing 41 kilograms. Subject communicates primarily in English, is intelligent, and generally cooperative with the Foundation personnel. Subject exudes a retroviral agent, hereafter referred to as SCP-1242-1, from all bodily orifices and glands. SCP-1242-1 is 99.9% infectious when transmitted by direct contact through skin contact, and 100% infectious when transmitted by direct contact through ingestion. SCP-1242-1 has been shown to be infectious to varying degrees through indirect contact for up to 14 days on average, with the longest recorded period between viral emission and infection being roughly 26 days. SCP-1242-1 contains an unusually large amount of fragmented genetic material and acts directly on the genetic and cellular level, temporarily reverting each individual cell to a stem cell through an unknown process before making it a new cell. Individuals infected are to be classified as SCP-1242-1A and quarantined immediately. Infection is followed by an incubation period of 6 hours, after which SCP-1242-1 symptoms begin to manifest.
The first thing to discuss is this virus in general. Being that it is a retrovirus, this would set it apart from other viruses, and this may be why we actually see the changes inflicted upon those who contract this illness. Retroviruses are unique in that they have RNA instead of DNA as its genetic material. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, is what sort of like a lot of viruses end up using, along with cells in general. Their own genes concerning the viruses are then expressed using the functions of the cell, which in turn will create more viruses to spread to other cells. Retroviruses are much more insidious in that they alter your genetic code, permanently becoming a part of that cell. Once entering a body, they will bond to the surface of the cell utilizing co-receptors like any other virus and then enter the target. Once in there, however, they have a method which allows the virus to bond with the DNA. Utilizing reverse transcriptase and sidestepping the function of the cell as it supplies it itself, it is able to then turn the RNA and translate it into DNA. And this becomes a part of the host genome. During any type of cellular mitosis or or gene expression, the cell will continue to make copies of the virus, which is then released into the body to infect other cells. There is a hypothesis currently circulating in the scientific community that potentially this is how complex multicellular life came to be via reproduction. As viruses invaded cells, they had an impact on the genome of single-celled organisms. In fact, everyone alive on Earth right now has roughly 8% of their DNA quite literally composed of information from ancient viruses. Another 40% of that genome is thought to be made up of the repetitive strings of genetic letters that have viral origin as well. And as you might guess, this would have a profound impact on how the cell would conduct itself, until one day a cell may have actually forcibly entered another cell. And this is where we get the sperm and egg. A sperm entering the egg is a lot like how a virus enters a cell, don't you think? Once the sperm makes contact with the outer protected layer of the egg, it is broken down. So actually the first sperm, this is kind of like one of those things that not a lot of people actually know, but the first sperm to get to the egg doesn't win. It's really the luckiest one. That lucky sperm will be able to bypass the protective coating, make contact with the membrane, and then enter the egg. Upon doing this, it dissolves and releases its genetic information into the cell, which then combines to create a person, at least in the case of humanity. With this frame of reference in mind, we can see exactly what SCP-1242 does upon infecting a host. The virus enters the body and begins the usual infection route to overtake the cells. It would appear, however, that the entire body is absolutely saturated with this virus. With all orifices and glands producing this virus, they are essentially boiling over with it, making this a highly infectious vector concerning 1242. But something strange may have happened during 1242's possible initial infection. Judging by what we see with the infection process and the fact that those infected with SCP-1242 end up becoming a version of 1242, in fact, pretty much the same, it would appear that SCP-1242 may have imprinted on the virus. This in turn has changed the viral RNA to some degree, which is then being created by other cells. This small change may be why we see changes down the line. However, with those infected and then the subsequently infecting of others, we don't see it. SCP-1242 may have actually just been a complete fluke concerning the imprint, but there's also another possibility which we will go over later. Once this imprint happened, this in turn caused the virus to carry out to others the genetic coding of SCP-1242, and with it, or at least a version of it, appears to be within the virus as it's created. The physiology of SCP-1242 is quite literally being carried to others. However, with an original host DNA concerning their own physiology still being quite intact, how does this overcome the barrier to alter them to such an extreme degree? Well, first, we must look at how the infection takes place, which will tell us everything we need to know about the immune function attempting to fight it to ultimately the complete destruction or restructuring of the human form.
Description continued. 6 hours into infection with SCP-1242-1A, they will experience acute pain in the joints, fever ranging from 38 to 40 degrees Celsius, respiratory difficulty, cardiac arrhythmia, cyanotic extremities. SCP-1242-1 ceases to be infectious at this time. 8 hours into infection. Subjects in this stage indicate that the pain is now global to the body and intense. Symptoms diverge in this state depending on initial mass of the infected individual. There is currently no data on individuals exactly matching the mass of SCP-1242. However, it has been noted that symptoms beyond this point are significantly less severe for individuals within plus or minus 10 kilograms of 40 kilograms. SCP-1242-1A that are larger in mass than SCP-1242 begin experiencing violent emesis, diarrhea, and perspiration beyond the levels associated with fever temperatures. Waste produced in this manner is composed of tissue types from throughout the body. Subjects begin to gradually decrease in mass and physical size. Instances of larger in mass than SCP-1242 have estimated a 43% survival rate at this stage. SCP-1242-1A that are similar in mass to SCP-1242 begin bloating and swelling and display voracious appetite with a preference for materials high in protein. Instances of SCP-1242-1A that are smaller in mass than SCP-1242 have an estimated 6% total survival rate of this stage without medical intervention. It is unknown whether such individuals could survive the full run of the infection without medical intervention. 9 hours into an infection. Symptoms accelerate as the subject rapidly alters to more closely match that of the mass of SCP-1242. All identifying characteristics native to race are eliminated, and the subject's body begins restructuring to achieve the end-stage result. Females have a significantly higher chance of dying due to complications associated with the restructuring of primary reproductive systems in this stage. Larger instances experience a continuation of emesis and diarrhea, skeletal fracturing and restructuring, and the sloughing off of skin and hair. Instances in this stage are prone to organ failure from compressional bursting and dehydration. Hydration can increase survival rates, but not substantially. Smaller instances experience rapid growth, with the associated internal lacerations and stress fractures from sudden growth of skeletal structure. It has been determined that continued nutritional supplementation substantially improves the chances of survival at this stage for smaller instances, boosting survival chances from 4% to 32%. 10 hours into infection. Subject's body structure now closely resembles SCP-1242. Symptoms converge and abate. SCP-1242-1 is once again infectious. 11 hours into infection. All symptoms abate. Subject is now visually indistinguishable from SCP-1242 and designated SCP-1242-2.
The process, as you can tell from the logs, is pretty jarring. The reality is the reshaping of the body is no easy task, and from our current understanding of physiology and anatomy, it should not be possible. That was until recently, when it was discovered that cells could actually be turned back into stem cells, effectively resetting the clock on them. Recently at the University of Wisconsin, it was found that you could take stem cells of varying age and take them back to what was essentially an embryonic stem cell. This breakthrough comes with some cautions, however. It is not known if it's a true embryonic cell, and it might still just revert back to a skin cell over time, rendering it useless in the face of fixing something like paralysis or reversing dementia-related damage. But there is hope to actually advance stem cell research by utilizing your own cells to do so. Now, this is great news for curing disease, but when it comes to causing diseases, this appears to be exactly how SCP-1242 hijacks the body of a person. When entering the cell, the virus has with it the reverse transcriptase, as mentioned earlier, and its own RNA coding to create more of itself, as well as the imprint on its own coding from 1242's physiology. But it would appear to also have the ability to possibly flip the master switch within the human genome in order to revert a cell back to its embryonic state. Once the cell has phased back into a stem cell state, SCP-1242's imprint is then placed in the genome of the cell. Now, there are a whole host of hormones, signals, and cellular activities associated with the formation of your physical morphology, going from embryo to newborn, and even more so, going from newborn to adult. So clearly, it would be multiple points within the cell itself where the genes were taken that in turn change the infected into 1242. After the 11 hours, either the afflicted has expired or they are completely changed into SCP-1242. The virus having been changed slightly by the genome of the original person who is now 1242, and thus the genome of others who are infected has really had profound impacts across the body. The main one being that not only just changing of the body, but also the changing of the brain, because the brain, according to the brain, is the most important organ. Which I'll tell you, this thing located in the brain case is really just a major ego machine. But what's most interesting is how there appears to be changes within the brain of those infected to suit the needs of the virus itself, possibly indicating that the virus has negated non-advantageous gene expression, which led to the depression of 1242.
Description continued. SCP-1242-2 may be distinguished from SCP-1242 only by testing. SCP-1242-2 does not produce SCP-1242-1 as a biological byproduct, carrying and transmitting it instead as an infectious bloodborne pathogen. In nearly all respects, SCP-1242-2 are identical to SCP-1242. Instances of SCP-1242-2 possess intelligence commensurate to that of SCP-1242 and display a range of reaction and personality traits consistent with 1242's non-depressive behaviors. Investigation into 1242-2's neurochemistry reveals that instances levels of serotonin and dopamine are elevated by an average of 15% above human baseline. This results in instances of 1242-2 generally behaving docilely and showing a heightened preference towards tactile sensation. It is hypothesized that instances do not develop depressive behaviors displayed in 1242 due to an inability to experience strong negative emotion infection without an outside trigger. 1242-2 have a drive to protect 1242, and in the pursuit of that goal will seek out and infect individuals to propagate more instances of 1242-2. In the event of a direct threat to 1242, instances become extremely violent, lashing out at the perceived threat with any tools and weapons available, but will attack unarmed should they lack weapons. Autopsies of instances terminated while defending SCP-1242 indicate that levels of serotonin and dopamine drop below baseline in response to a perceived threat, with a concurrent and equal elevation in levels of epinephrine and norepinephrine, as well as testosterone. Psychological evaluation shows that individual instances continue to retain fragmented memories of their existence prior to infection, but do not display any personality traits inconsistent with 1242's non-depressive behavior. Comparison of EEGs taken before and after conversion reveals significant restructuring of the frontal lobes, which may contribute to this alteration of personality traits. 1242 was discovered after the Foundation became aware of reports from a rural town, expunged, describing identical male use corresponding with reports of individuals disappearing. Subject was located in an outlying structure 1.2 kilometers outside of town proper, surrounded by 24 instances of 1242-2. Subject immediately warned Foundation personnel away, but made no attempt to escape. Agents expunged and expunged were both exposed to SCP-1242-1 in the course of interviewing the subject. Agent expunged recognized a potential biohazard and was able to communicate the necessary precautions before succumbing to the infection. Containment teams eradicated all present instances of 1242-2 and took 1242 into custody. The town was placed under quarantine until such time as a lack of infections was determined to exist. Class C amnetics were administered to the population, who were then relocated under a claim of eminent domain. The area of potential infection was then sterilized. 1242 has displayed bouts of chronic depression associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and long-term isolation. Subject avoids discussion of the onset of its condition and refuses to give its name. Its fingerprints do not match any on file.
This is what I believe is the biggest indicator that SCP-1242 may not be the original copy. The first aspect is the depression he displays. Again, it could be because he knows what's happening and really he's the one causing it, but the other aspect is maybe he was changed against his own will and that others may still be out there. A clue to this is the fact that in the addendum, we see evidence that could possibly be based on this timeline.
Addendum A. Reports of instances of SCP-1242-2 outside the Foundation's control have been corroborated and neutralized on 5 separate dates. Instances have been located as far as 4,700 kilometers from the point of initial containment. Attempts to question SCP-1242 about these instances have been met with escalation of depressive behavior and emotional withdrawal.
The rate at which SCP-1242 moves means that they have 11 hours. 11 hours to travel 4,700 kilometers. All the while they are in excruciating pain. This sows some doubt as to if this is the only one out there, and this indicates to me that he's not the only one, which also explains the depression. But what's interesting is how the others do not display this, but also seem to have a sort of link to SCP-1242. Keeping their mind docile and craving the touch of another, this virus would directly be working to change the behavior of the body and the person to keep it spreading. Now, it may not be actively thinking as we would call it, but the success, possibly prior to iterations of it having had to spread because of increased dopamine levels, would mean that this particular strain was the most successful. However, the lower levels increasing aggression remains an oddity. How would a virus know that its progenitor is in danger and cause the body to react in a certain way? This may indicate that the virus itself has a collective sentience of some sort, which means that it's entirely possible the initial taking on of the physiology of the person into the viral genome may not have been a fluke, but a way to identify who's infected and who isn't. Protective nature amongst those infected one generation down does not seem to be present, just the original person who was infected. This has led to sites being raided in a militia-like way for those infected to recover the original vector from the hands of the Foundation, as mentioned in the deeper archives.
Closed files. On expunged 20 expunged, 56 instances of SCP-1242-2 mounted an assault on site expunged, where SCP-1242 is contained. Instances were armed with weapons ranging from small arms to explosive munitions made from commercially available ingredients. Instances displayed coordination and tactics at a level associated with dedicated civilian militia training full-time for a sustained period. Initial incursion was minimal due to a rapid response by perimeter teams and initiation of site lockdown. While initial casualties were low, casualties from infection of personnel by SCP-1242-1 were high. It is still unknown how instances were able to obtain weapons and locate 1242.
SCP-1242 is odd in several ways, as you might have gathered from listening to this log. The first strange aspect is how the complete restructuring and expiration of the host is both favorable. This almost appears to be willful to an extent, as subjecting the body to this likely wouldn't really benefit the virus all that much, because it's incredibly risky as it limits the spread. This would indicate that a larger goal here is probably in sight for specific meat suits to be changed into an army of SCP-1242. The second interesting possibility is concerning the brain, as while people do have memories of their past, they still resemble 1242 and a lot of mannerisms, but again, they still are retaining some memories to some degree, although everything that made them originally is no longer adhered to. Furthermore, considering that the genes of those infected versus the genes of SCP-1242 are different, means that the anatomy of the person is targeted concerning phenotype and then changed, but other genes are likely left intact. Most of these point to the virus spreading slower at its own hindrance due to the pathway it takes on infection, which as stated points to something larger going on with the infected apart from just happenstance. Certain people could almost be compared to being picked out to survive based on their body size and potentially their body composition, while others expire once symptoms begin coming on. I believe a possible origin point would need to be discovered, because even if the second generation afflicted have different symptoms and appear to protect SCP-1242, the virus had to come from somewhere. And with cases popping up in that small amount of time, 4,700 miles away, SCP-1242 may not be the only one out there causing this, as the time frame does not appear to match up.